It's 2 o'clock, so let's get started on time. Good afternoon and welcome to the Virginia Festival of the Book. It's the 20th year for the Book Festival here in Charlottesville. We have a wonderful panel here for some Q&A after they discuss their most recent books. I'm Bob Gibson, your moderator this afternoon, and I'm a lapsed journalist who worked 34 years in reporting and editing and column writing before coming over to the university 8 years ago to work at the Virginia Foundation, actually to help run the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership at UVA. We have 4 experts on politics and international relations with us on today's panel. Our topic is a broad one, the United States in the world. Couldn't get much broader. I promise we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after the 4 authors speak. Let's introduce the panel members. Jim Caesar is Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia and Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. He's the author of several books on American politics and American political thought, including Presidential Selection, Reconstructing America, Nature and History in the American Political Development, Designing a Polity, and Professor Caesar has also co-authored a series on the American presidential elections since 1992, the most recent book of which is part of the topic today, After Hope and Change. So let's start with Jim Caesar, and each of the authors is going to have a 5 to 7 minute presentation, and then we'll get into Q&A with all of you. Thank you. Jim.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I've mentioned first in this series of election books coincided with the first year of the Book Festival. Happy to be back. The series of books looks at the campaigns themselves and then the meanings of the election for American politics. The campaign itself, well, that's important. The campaign is the center of so much attention in modern American politics, so much so that we're practically starting the campaign of 2016 this year. What do we have to say? What's the thesis of the book insofar as the campaign is was concerned in 2008? It's included in the title, After Hope and Change. A real change, you could say, from 2008. 2008 was a stunning and extraordinary election. It was inspirational. It added enthusiasm to American politics. It was based on the slogan, After Hope and Change. One of the most extraordinary events, not only for American politics, but in a way for world politics. It was the first, in a sense, global election of an American president. The president's candidate's Obama's appeal spread far beyond the United States. He could just as easily be celebrated in Bangladesh and in Ecuador as on the streets of Washington, D.C. There was a phenomenon of world public opinion, and he saw himself, and others saw himself as, I think, becoming elected president of the United States, but in a sense coronated as president of the world. It had a quasi-religious aspect to it as well, where it seemed to take the place of a religious enthusiasm. But what about 2012? You couldn't imagine an event that's more different. Try even to remember the slogan of the 2012 election on Obama's side. Hard to remember, it was forward. And no sooner it was forward mentioned, it was dropped the day after the campaign was over. There was nothing memorable in the 2012 campaign itself. I think it's something that Obama and the Obama team want to forget, except for the fact that they won. And that's, of course, the most important thing about an election campaign. Still, it was a campaign which was won in many respects on being able to mobilize voters rather than to inspire them. And it had a not untypical of American politics, it had an extremely negative angle to it, attack and besmirch the opponent. What was the meaning of the election of 2012? Well, obviously it was a relief for the Democrats to win, and it was a deep disappointment for the Republicans to lose, since so many Republicans thought that this was an election that they not only could have, but should have won. So in the aftermath, there was a great deal of gloom on the Republican side. Yet, when you look at the figures, just begin with the statistics of the election, you find something interesting. Yes, Obama did win. On the other hand, he was the first president to be reelected in American history who lost vote share between his first election and his second election. All others who were reelected went up. He went down. You could also describe it as a status quo election. Think of where American politics was in terms of who was in power the day before the election and the day after. the same people. Obama was president, Harry Reid was head of the Senate, John Boehner was head of the House. Everything continued, even the minority leaders continued the day after the election. In that sense, it was looked a little bit like a status quo election. However, I think the Democrats could take this from the election, that they thought at that time that the election of Obama sealed and settled politics between 2008 and 2010, namely his new agenda, which he enacted in that period. So by not losing, the Democrats thought they won. You could think of American politics in the last now 5 years, or 6 years, coming on 6 years, as a duel of two mandates. There was the mandate of 2008, which was the new agenda, Obamacare, a vastly expanded role for the federal government. And then 2010 was the great repudiation of this, or so that midterm election was interpreted. A stunning change in the number of people in the House, with Republicans gaining control of the House. Coming close in the Senate, and but for some bad candidates, probably would have won the Senate, and especially at the state level, capturing 6 more governorships and loads of state legislatures. And a lot of the action in American politics since 2010 has come from the states. Think of, for example, what's been going on in Wisconsin. 2012, these two mandates squared off. This was the key. We were going to settle things which weren't quite settled in 2010. Which was the true mandate? I suppose you could say that the Obama election, from this point of view, was the repudiation of the repudiation. That's how it was regarded. The Republicans, if they couldn't move ahead, and there's a truth about politics, if you can't move ahead, you're moving backwards. The Republican momentum to reverse 2008 was stalled. And that seemed to settle things, or so I thought it would be others. This book, when it was published, seemed to sort of not favorable enough to President Obama. But now when we look back on it, we see an effect that was perhaps overly favorable to the 2012 election. Because 2014 is coming up, and look at it again, it's the same election as the last 2 elections. The 2 mandates are dueling, and not only are they dueling for the beginning of the control of the Congress, but also looking forward to the presidency of 2016. We thought that Obamacare would be settled by 2012. It turns out not quite. Obamacare is at the center of this election, and it even seems possible that this law could in some way be repealed or modified, something which no one would have thought after 2012. In fact, as we see now, it's not a law, but a project. It hasn't been implemented. It's not settled law in any usual sense. And what was done by the pen can be undone by the pen. What about post-2014? Well, if the Republicans win, it will renew the repudiation in public opinion, prepare the way for 2016. Would change politics if the Republicans controlled the Senate only in this respect, that the president would have to sustain his position, as he surely would, by veto, rather than today by avoiding having to veto since the Democrats control the Senate. But it would all point towards 2016. Could one really, after all this time, modify or even repeal this stellar signature element of Obama's domestic policy? And a final word about foreign policy. It may well end up, foreign policy, may well end up being more consequential for American politics than domestic affairs. Certainly it hasn't been as important politically. The 2008 campaign was supposed to be about foreign policy. That's how Obama's candidacy began, by his opposition to the war in Iraq. But by the time that election took place, the Iraq issue looked somewhat stabilized, and the election ended up focusing on domestic affairs. So it was the dog that didn't bark in the 2008 campaign. Obama's foreign policy could be characterized as something like this: to transform the United States from the indispensable nation, especially the indispensable nation as a military power, to a nation pretty much like all others. That is, putting it simply, to end American exceptionalism. That could be seen to be the core. And in Obama's own view, it seemed that this transformation could take place without America losing very much power because of his own control over world public opinion, his ability through his own constituency and rhetoric to be able to move the world in another direction without the need of military force and a more muscular foreign policy. Well, there were signs that this idea wouldn't work in the first administration already. And the Republicans in the 2012 election spoke, at least in their own primary, of attacking the president on the basis of foreign affairs. The idea of defending exceptionalism was at the core of many of the speeches of the Republicans. It was the buzzword, in particular of Mitt Romney's campaign during the primary. I sat through some of those dreadful presidential foreign policy debates with such experts as Herman Cain, pontificating on foreign policy. Dreadful thing, but still, there was at least this theme that somehow exceptionalism was at stake in the result. As it turned out, in the final campaign itself, didn't play that much of a role. The president was able to shield himself by the fact that during his administration they had been able to capture and kill bin Laden. And also during the debates, if you recall, the vice president in particular almost baited Representative Ryan to attack the Democrats from the right. You really want war in Afghanistan? Questions like this, and the Republicans recoiled and didn't say very much really about foreign affairs during the whole presidential campaign. So now we come to politics today. Will foreign policy play a role in the campaign in 2014? Probably not very much. And yet, it certainly has had its impact on the personal standing of the President of the United States. The difficulties that he's experienced since the 2012 campaign have impacted less maybe people's view of policy than their assessment of the strength of the leader, and have contributed, I think, to his decline in support among American people. Perhaps that 1 week or 2 weeks where he dealt with Syria stand out as one of the low points in mastery and calculation of presidential leadership, which I think has hurt him, not so much that he can come back, that damages personal standing. 2016 could be an election which is not only about domestic affairs, but raises the question again of American exceptionalism.